So what's your snacky treat things?
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is really loud, so I apologize. I'll back up a little bit. Thank you for coming. Welcome. Just so you know you're in the right spot, this is the KDAD's HCBS Waiver Renewal Forum, so getting some input from you. My name is Jennifer Pasek. I work with WSU's Community Engagement Institute, and we are here to help support KDADs and actually what they're doing with their waiver renewals. There's 4 waivers coming up for renewal this next year, and so they are ahead of the game and getting out there and sharing some information and actually gathering input from you on what changes you may want to see and what could work better and what's working well. So I have staff with me today across the room. They will be helping with handling microphones as well as making sure you have interpretation services. So if you're here with WSU, just wave so we can see who you are. Yay! So let them know if you need anything. Just a reminder again, the restrooms are out the door to the right, and there's coffee and tea in the back, water at the tables. And if you could put your phone on vibrate or silent, that would be great. If you need to take a phone call, we know that life doesn't stop here, so please step outside to do so. So to get us started tonight, I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we're going to do. So again, we're here to share some information, some updates, and knowledge that KDADS has to share with us about changes across the waivers and what they're planning so far, and then to gather your feedback. So I'd like to introduce the Commissioner, Amy Penrod. So welcome. Why don't you take it away?
Okay, good evening. Thank you so much for coming and spending the evening with us. My name is Amy Penrod. I'm the Commissioner for Community Services and Programs with the Department for Aging and Disability Services. We will be reviewing the 4 home and community-based service waivers that are up for renewal in calendar year 2019. We are asking for your feedback as participants, family members, providers, and stakeholders. KDAD staff from the Community Services and Programs Commission are conducting these public forums in 4 cities. This is our 3rd stop. We're doing 2 sessions in each city, gathering public feedback on what you feel is working well, what you feel could be improved with the existing waivers, and any changes you'd like to see as we move forward with the renewal process. At this time, I want to introduce the KDAD staff that I have with me that can help me answer questions as needed. I have Russell Bowles, our ICF Program Manager. I have Cindy Wickman, our HCBS Director. I have Callie Simmons, our PD Program Manager. Michelle Hayden, our TBI Program Manager. And Paula Morgan, our IED Program Manager. So if you have questions for us, I may be relying on these fine individuals to help me out. Before I dive into the presentation, I want to be sure to address a question that I received since some of the forum invitations have gone out. Though we are talking about the renewals of 4 of the state's 7 waivers during these sessions, it should be made clear that we're not talking about waiver integration. Each of these waivers we will talk about today will be submitted to CMS for review and approval separately. So with that, I will get started here. As we said, there are 4 waivers renewing in 2019. The frail elderly waiver is renewing, it actually expires December 31st of 2019. The IDD waiver expires June 30th of 2019. The physical disability waiver expires December 31st, and the traumatic brain injury waiver expires June 30th. So as you can see, we've got 2 that are expiring in June, the end of June, and 2 that are expiring at the end of December. We wanted to share our anticipated timeline for working on these renewals, creating drafts and gathering public feedback. Right now we are doing our kind of an informal public feedback. We are asking for your comments and suggestions as we draft the waiver renewal proposals. We are required via CMS to have a formal public comment period. We anticipate that formal public comment period will begin on or about November 1st. Once We have drafts ready. They will be posted to our website. Notices will go out, and individuals will have an opportunity to make comment and actually see the language that we're proposing, make suggestions, comments, and provide feedback on that. That feedback is collected. The state does have a number of days to respond and answer questions that are posed during that formal public comment period. And then those formal comments and responses will be posted to the KDOT's website. In addition, that information will be submitted with our waiver renewal applications to CMS so that they can also view the feedback that we've received from the public. So we've broken up this presentation into two kind of sections. The first is general review areas. These are areas in each of the waivers, across all 4 of the waivers, that we have reviewed language, made updates, and are general across the 4. After I complete a quick review of these, I will go through the waiver-specific updates that we have planned. As you may know, the state's been working to update the state's functional assessment tools, and I'll go into a little bit more detail on each of these as we move through, but that's an area where we've been evaluating the waiver language. The state also has been working with stakeholders to address compliance with the home and community-based settings rule. We have extensively reviewed sections pertaining to participant health and welfare, including the use of restrictive interventions. We have reviewed all waiver language and updated it to reflect current policies and regulations, both on the state and the federal level. And finally, we've performed an overall cleanup of the waiver to remove outdated language, remedy grammatical and typographical errors. So for the functional assessment, essentially the changes that we're proposing in the waiver include updating references to the current assessment tool to allow the state to transition to an updated Medicaid Functional Eligibility Instrument, or MFEI. The MFEI tool will replace the current assessment tool for the frail elderly waiver, the physically disabled waiver, and the traumatic brain injury waiver. The MFEI for IDD will eventually replace the BASIS as an assessment tool. I will point out that the MFEI is adapted from an inter-REI tool. It is person-centered and supports-based. It's used in over 17 states and functions as a full care planning tool. We have, along the way, been advised by a wonderful group of individuals, actually 2 groups, one to work on the assessment tool for the 3 frail elderly physical disability and traumatic brain injury waiver assessments, and then one for the IDD waiver assessment. As I mentioned a little bit ago, we also have been analyzing the impact from the HCBS settings rule. We anticipate the settings rule to have a low to medium impact for the frail elderly IDD, PD, and TBI waiver renewals. The settings rule establishes requirements for the qualities of settings that are eligible for reimbursement for the Medicaid home and community-based services provided under Medicaid. In the final rule, CMS is really moving away from defining home and community-based settings by what they are not, and defining them by the nature and quality of an individual's experience. The final rule requires that home and community-based settings meet certain qualifications, and we are evaluating the language in each waiver to ensure that we can continue to meet the requirements of that federal rule. Another area we reviewed extensively is restrictive interventions. We have conducted this thorough review of restrictive interventions, including restraint and seclusion. Currently, the IDD waiver allows for restrictive interventions, seclusion, and restraint under certain conditions. though the use of such interventions must be reported to the state's adverse incident reporting system. Similar restrictive interventions are not permitted for the frail elderly, physical disability, and traumatic brain injury waivers. In reviewing health and welfare, as well as the restrictive interventions, all language in what is Appendix G of each waiver has been reviewed and updated to reflect all relevant federal and state statutory requirements, including those required by the HCBS settings rule. We have also addressed staff qualifications, training, have included examples of unreasonable and prohibited uses of restrictive interventions, and have included information about the state's compliance monitoring. As you may know, in 2017, CMS placed Kansas on a corrective action plan, which has implications not only for performance measures outlined in the waivers, but also how those measures are used to gauge quality. We have been working with stakeholders across several populations, including the Can Care Advocates Network, including CASEL, InterHab, to come up with what we believe are meaningful performance measures that will help folks understand what our goals are and help us track and trend our progress in meeting those performance goals. So as we move through into the future and begin sharing these results on priority measures, you'll start seeing these in the department's presentations to the legislature and to other groups as we move into the future. And I expect we'll be posting those also to our website, so they'll be available. As I mentioned earlier, we conducted an extensive review of all the policies and policies and procedures, things that have changed over the last several years, and made sure that those references in the waivers are updated. The first is the person-centered service plan policy. That reference has been updated in the waivers. The HCBS institutional transitions policy, which establishes the process for supporting institutional transitions after the close of the Money Follows the Person grant. We have updated references to that. We have also updated the background check language to reflect the revised statute from the 2018 legislative session. Further, we have reviewed grievances and appeals and the language contained in the waivers for those, ensuring that MCO processes adhere to federal and state requirements. The state of Kansas had also adopted a personal care services and limitations policy that went into effect in 2016. We wanted to make sure that the references to that policy were updated and complete in each of the relevant waivers. Finally, modifications to MCO reporting for network adequacy have been developed. Network adequacy is reported quarterly through our Can Care administrative report system, and we are going to be increasing our efforts to access these reports and participate in ongoing monitoring activities, and that is also reflected in the waiver language that we propose. Okay, so that was a review of the issues and topics that pertain to all four of the waivers we seek to renew. Next, we're going to talk about the waiver-specific updates that we propose. So for the physical disability waiver, we do not have any changes identified to services at this time. The waiver updates that we've identified to this point will primarily focus on updating those policy references and correcting grammatical and spelling errors. That is another reason why we're here. So if you have questions, concerns, suggestions about how to make the waiver services better, this is an opportunity to make those suggestions. The frail elderly waiver is up next. And currently, the frail elderly waiver offers enhanced care services as a crisis service. Currently, an individual would have to meet 5 out of the 6 criteria listed here in order to be considered for that service on the waiver. We are proposing to make the service more accessible to FE waiver participants by reducing the number of criteria that they would need to meet down to 4 from 5. For the traumatic brain injury waiver, there are a lot of changes coming to this waiver. As you may know, the 2018 legislature included a proviso in the budget bill that directs KDADs to include acquired brain injury into the current traumatic brain injury waiver. Further, the proviso directs the amended waiver to serve children under the age of 16. These are pretty significant changes for the waiver. We began work right away, working with stakeholders to develop definitions for eligibility for the brain injury waiver. That work is ongoing. Assistive services, crisis exception policies and processes, a review of current services. Those are all critical pieces of the amended waiver. In addition, because the waiver will now serve children under the age of 16, the state needs to identify and adopt a pediatric assessment tool. And finally, the intellectual and developmental disability waiver. This is an example of the overall cleanup that we mentioned earlier. Sleep cycle support service definition was modified in 2016. References to sleep cycle have been changed to enhanced care services. Wherever there may be an outdated reference to sleep cycle support, it will be removed and revised to enhanced care services. So this is no change to the policy, no change in the effect, other than just making sure our language is clear and consistent across the waiver. Okay, before I finish my part of the presentation here, I wanted to hit just a couple of the frequently asked questions. Since the invitations went out, we've had these questions a few times. Why was nothing mentioned about the SEV or autism waiver? Will there be a separate meeting for these? The 2018 forums that we're doing right now this week are on the 4 waivers that are up for renewal in 2019. The SED and autism waivers are not up for renewal again until 2022. If amendments are made to those waivers before 2022, KDADs will be back out engaging with stakeholders and collecting comment on any proposed changes at that time. We have had questions from durable medical equipment and certified respiratory therapy providers about whether these forums are meant for them, if they pertain to them. We have encouraged anyone who's a provider, particularly with regards to frail elderly, physical disability, and traumatic brain injury, those types of providers may be interested with regard to those waivers. Let's see. Question number 3 was, will the PowerPoint slides be available? Yes, KDADS is intending to post these on our website no later than Monday morning, the 17th. For those individuals that haven't been able to make it to one of our in-person public forums, we are holding 2 conference calls. The first will be Monday the 17th at 1 o'clock, and the second would be Monday the 17th beginning at 6 o'clock. These slides will be posted so that individuals who are calling in on the phone could have access to the material and see the slides that we're talking about as we go through. And then finally, I addressed this at the beginning of the presentation. Does KDADS intend to reintroduce a plan for waiver integration? No, the plan is not to integrate waivers. We are seeking the renewal of 4 separate and very distinct HCBS waivers. So now I'm going to turn it back over to our facilitators from Wichita State, and as we provide an opportunity for you to ask questions and provide some feedback.
Okay, so we know that's a lot of information and updates, so I first want to open up to any questions about what you just heard any kind of questions for clarification about what was shared. So if we do, we have Danny and Vanessa and part of my staff helping with microphones. So raise your hand and they will come to you with a microphone if you have questions about what you just heard, anything you need clarification on. No?
Are you asking just something specific? Or, okay.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, ask your question.
All right, one of the original screens, it was about the assessment tools, and you had the 4 waivers. And under TBI, it says fully integrated into the community. Is that a goal on the TBI waiver?
I believe you're referring to the home and community-based settings rule overview, that slide that I provided. That information describes our initial and very early analysis of settings in which people receive TBI services. So for the most part, and I'll ask staff to correct me if I'm wrong, by and large at this point, there would need to be very little modification to the way that services are being delivered via the TBI waiver in order to comply with the HCBS final settings rule.
Okay.
I'm not understanding.
Yeah, sorry. I don't know if that answered my question or not.
What do you mean by final settings rule?
The final settings rule is a federal regulation that all states are now being asked to comply with. The goal is to ensure that all home and community-based services are provided in settings that meet certain qualifications. And I've listed a few of them. That the setting is integrated in and supports full access to the community. So we want settings to avoid isolating individuals. The settings can be selected from among setting options by the individual. That individual's rights of privacy, dignity, and respect are are paramount. Basically optimizing autonomy and independence and making life choices. So the final settings rule really is moving towards looking at participant experience in the setting in which they are receiving their service. It's a very large rule and very complicated. We are, as a state, we're working through submitting plans to CMS for initial approval. That doesn't probably mean much to someone who's not working in it day by day, but as we work through making sure that the settings in which our participants receive their services are as inclusive and community-based as possible, that's kind of the goal.
Can you go back to that screen?
Yep.
Okay. So the box on the lower right under TBI waiver, where it says fully integrated into the community,
Mm-hmm.
is that a goal? Or, because I'm not understanding what that means.
Well, currently, individuals that receive TBI waiver services are receiving their services in the community. If they're receiving their services in an institution, that's not what we're talking about here. That's a traumatic T-birth rehabilitation facility. So this is talking solely about services received in the community. For some of the other waivers, there are various settings like assisted living facilities that are traditionally thought of as very community oriented, but there's a little bit of, it kind of depends on how the setting is set up and how folks receive their services, how independent they're able to be, how they get to choose their schedules and things like that. So on the spectrum right now, if someone's receiving TBI waiver services, the final settings rule probably won't have a lot of impact on the way they receive their services going forward.
Okay.
Any other questions right now? I'm going to open it up since we have a little bit of a smaller group. So on your tables, you have some forms that ask some really good questions to get your brain thinking. And so you can fill those out. One is, one side has what's working well, what needs to be improved. You can mark those down and then mark what waiver you're talking about if you're specifically thinking of what waiver you work with or have services from. The other side is, what may work well with your waiver also may work well with another waiver if you have an idea like that. So that's there if you want to fill it out and leave it there. But we also want to just open this time up for any feedback among those kind of line of questions. What's working well? What can be improved for you in regards to the 4 waivers we're speaking about, and then what might work across all of the other waivers of what's working on yours. So I'm going to open up to the floor again. Raise your hand. We'll send somebody over with the mic if you have feedback. If you'd like to give questions.
Jen, do you want to go to the slide that has the questions on it?
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
These are the first couple questions. So what's working well for you and what may need to be improved? Anyone have any feedback or input for this data on this?
Oh, hell, nature of the force of vacuum. And I don't even know if this is the right place to bring this up, and I'm going to go back to the fully integrated in community. My understanding that your answer is that's more about process and where, as opposed to an end goal for the individual client, which, when you say stakeholder, is that the individual client?
In my mind, stakeholder is a pretty broad term. It could be a participant. When I say participant, I'm usually referring to the person receiving the services.
Okay.
When I think of stakeholder, that could be, that could include participants, but it also could include advocates, folks whose job, it is to advocate for individuals. Could be providers. It could be a whole host of individuals. Anyone that has an interest in what we're doing here.
Okay. So, for a participant, is this the forum to ask, are you guys more about process and making sure that what is at the state level is what the feds want? Or is this also a place to ask the question, is your end goal to get the participant fully integrated into the community?
I would say our goal would be to get the participant fully engaged and integrated into the community, if that is what the participant would like. I think we really are trying to move to a person-centered approach. So what's good for one person and what one person likes is not necessarily what's good for someone else. And so I think the movement really is towards individual preferences and that person-centeredness. That's not to say that we don't have some considerations that we have to take into account with the federal government or state regulation. We do, but ultimately our goal is to make sure that we are serving individuals in a place that is most beneficial to them and is their choice and is how they want to receive their services.
So you got some issues with the TBI waiver? Well, I feel like I'm hogging the whole show.
If, I will say, if you have a particular situation that's personal, we'd be happy to talk with you one-on-one just right after we wrap, and we can get some details from you, and if there's something that we can help you with, we'd be happy to do that. It's up to you.
Going back to the same question, I think I don't understand if it's in the second box, it said the services provided at the person's home. So that's one of the services, the kind of services that we or that you are going to provide. But then in the last box, it says fully integrated into the community. Does that mean that you want that person fully integrated in the community, or that the services are going to provide by services within the community?
I think it would depend on what the person, what their person-centered plan would be. Individuals will receive services in their home. They might receive some of their services in a like a facility setting, a doctor's office or such, but we would want an individual to receive the services they need in the setting that's most appropriate for them. We want to be sure that we're not just providing services in the individual's home to where they sit at home all day and don't get to experience the things that you or I do, being able to be out in the community. So that's why we're talking about community integration. Individuals need the opportunities. They need to be supported if they want to be receiving services in places other than just a facility or just their home, but in that broader community.
Yeah, again, but I think the wording maybe not be really clear. So it seems like, what the first step is to receive the services at their homes, but then the second is the plan is to either integrate fully that person into the community, or have that person receive services from clinics or places within the community. So that's,
Okay.
I think that's the...
Well, I may be able to take that back and provide a little clarification going forward in future presentations. Thank you.
Do we have any others that have any input or feedback on what's working well or what can be improved with your waivers? No? If you're, oh.
My question is, who determines the providers that contract or honor each waiver? Because we've had situations where like home aids agencies, they don't honor the TDI waiver. So are those something that go out to the provider's contract with?
Yeah, the providers contract with managed care organizations. It's the managed care organization's responsibility to have contracts with an adequate number of providers to provide the services that are needed by our participants. That is an area where we continue to invest additional resources into tracking that, figuring out ways that we can track and trend, making sure that we do have ways that we can measure what is an adequate provider network. Ultimately, it is the MCO's responsibility to have the providers contracted. It would be the state's responsibility to oversee the MCOs to ensure that they have that network adequacy.
It's been our experience that that's definitely an area that needs improvement.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to open it up again if anyone has any questions or feedback or input. What's working well, what may need to be improved. are not a microphone person, definitely write it on the form, and also there's note cards at the table, and it will be collected and given to the state in the same fashion and same report, so they get all that feedback. I also want to remind, as Amy said, that if you have an individual personal situation you want assistance with, there's state staff here that could meet with you after we wrap up, as well as the ombudsman office is here. In fact, if you can wait, Carrie, thank you. As well, that can help answer some questions about personal situations and whatnot. So if we don't have any more, I'm going to thank you for coming and close us out for the evening. And thank you. Make sure you leave your comments. Thank you all.
I appreciate it very much. Thank you for taking the time.